Tonight, the Baltimore welfare system is under attack from a city grand jury. The jury released a report this afternoon accusing the Department of Social Services with inept management and careless investigative policies in detecting welfare cheating. The grand jury took on the welfare mess after Eyewitness News investigative reporter David Bryan raised questions about cheating with some local prosecutors.
Well, Jerry, in fact, I've spent the past several months investigating welfare ripoffs in Maryland. I found that even by the most conservative estimates, almost $10 million are being lost through error and fraud in the state's welfare system every year. Now, those are federal and state tax dollars that are deducted from your paycheck. Tonight, I'm going to tell you what welfare fraud is, who's doing it, why they're still getting away with it, and why the welfare system is not working. Remember, the welfare system in Maryland handles millions of tax dollars, which are supposed to be going to those who are in real need, but which all too often end up in the hands of welfare cheaters.
There are as many kinds of welfare fraud as there are days in the month. Some of the most common kinds are these: the illegal buying and selling of food stamps on the street, fraud committed by workers who are collecting a full-time salary at the job and receiving a full welfare check in the mail at the same time, theft and fraud committed by caseworkers and other Department of Social Services employees themselves. Often these schemes involve a caseworker and a client or several clients who are working together. And there are lots more ways that people rip off the welfare system by using 2 or 3 or 4 or a dozen different names and cashing checks under each name each month. Or cashing checks in Maryland, Washington, D.C., Virginia, and Delaware all in the same month. Or by reporting the first check that comes in the mail as stolen. Social Services will issue a new check, then go cash both of them. The list goes on and on. We found one of the most common kinds of welfare fraud involves food stamps. In fact, some law enforcement officials tell me that food stamp fraud is completely out of control and is so common that at a recent meeting of fraud prosecutors, one federal food stamp enforcement officer said that investigators and prosecutors can't even begin to touch most of the food stamp ripoff. Food stamps are sold or given free to the very poor. They use the stamps to buy food, which they would otherwise not be able to afford with the little bit of money they have. But what often happens is that the stamps end up being sold on the street by the recipient to someone else. When that happens, both the buyer and the seller benefit, and you know who pays for it: you and me, the taxpayers, in the taxes taken out of our paycheck. The buyer will purchase, let's say, $30 or $40 worth of food stamps on the street, or let's say $20 in cash. That means that he can then go to the food store and for his $20 cash outlay, he can buy $30 or $40 worth of food with the stamps he bought illegally. For the seller, who gets the food stamps for free or close to it, and who supposedly needs the stamps for food, well, he makes $20 hard cash in the illegal transaction. $20 that obviously will not be spent on food. Otherwise, he would have kept the food stamps in the first place and bought more food with the $30 or $40 worth of stamp value. According to government estimates, tens of millions of tax dollars are ripped off each year by food stamp cheaters. I learned that in Baltimore there are illegal food stamp distribution centers where the stamps are peddled from a central location. Often drugs are sold side by side with the stamps at the same location. In some cases, it's the employees of the Social Services Department, caseworkers, and others who are stealing the welfare system blind.
When I got arrested, federal people said I took $60,000 for welfare fraud. I know damn well I didn't take no $60,000. You know, that's what they said.
Larry Wilson used to work here at the Upton District Office of the Baltimore City Department of Social Services. Now, Larry spends his time here, convicted in separate cases for welfare fraud and armed robbery. When Larry Wilson worked at Upton, he devised a scheme to help his friends cash stolen welfare checks for a cut, of course.
How much of this goes on, in your opinion?
I would say in every district, well, it would have to be, well, see, each district has about 40 people, working staff, you know. Within that staff, man, you got at least 3 people doing something wrong, man, you know.
Another common welfare ripoff involves people who work and collect a welfare check on the side. Diane is a welfare cheater. She works a full-time job on an assembly line, brings home $100 a week after taxes are taken out of her paycheck, and collects a full $164 a month welfare check. She lives in a middle-class neighborhood, middle class all the way, one that most of us would be glad to be able to afford to live in.
Do you have a guilty conscience about what you're doing, or how do you feel about it in that way?
Well, you know, sometimes I think about it, you know, whether right or whether wrong. But, you know, what am I supposed to do? I mean, if I stop work, you know, it'll mean that, you know, I have less money. And my daughter, you know, she's getting ready to go to school now. And she needs clothes and food. And I need clothes and food and somewhere to stay. I mean, who's going to do this, you know?
As you look at a welfare system, as it comes down from the Congress and the state, that everyone agrees is a national disgrace. There's no one who disputes the fact that the welfare system is a mess and that it is a disgrace. And hopefully one of these days we'll stop talking about it and change it. You are going to have fraud, and you are going to have a certain amount of error in a program that provides people with benefits only at 50% of the poverty level.
Now, in some cases, it is legal to work and collect welfare at the same time, usually where the amount of income is very low or where a large family must be supported. But in a number of cases, like Diane's, it's not legal.
What you are watching is a special Eyewitness News investigative report on welfare fraud here in Maryland. I've been investigating the loopholes and the ripoffs in the system for several months now.
Well, David, we've seen several examples, a few examples that you've shown us of welfare cheating, but beyond that, would you say from what you know that it's really extensive? Are there many cases?
Jerry, the state says that in the case that we just showed, where a person is working and illegally collecting welfare, that the state is paying out $5.5 million every year to those people. I also discovered that almost 1 out of every 10 welfare recipients is working and getting more than they deserve.
Here we go. Come on.
A battle was fought in Brooklyn. Haitian soldiers killed 3,000 men. Much of the fighting took place in what is now Prospect Greenwood Cemetery, as well as the park
low
slope
blowers,
and
illegal cocaine growers, starvation, profanity, anxiety, brothers try me, gunslingers, dead bringers.
Yo, my slang's out of this world. Mixed collaboration, man, little man and his girl. Way of life got me thinking. Plus I'm analyzing young youths on roofs. You know, 3-time felony groups roll together. Tropical trees, but whatever. Yo, we could go run up on kids for levers. What drug? Faculties, bubble keys for cheese. Cream flow like 7 C's. Hit chicks, Guyanese, word up. Hold your head before you fall out. The more out, the devil want that. Let's get my niggas locked all out. Change for better. That be my only vendetta with life. Feed your seed right, he's breathing and deep right. Chef, remarkable, sparkable, raps, and jackable cats. Never get jacked. See it then move, black paradise swipe. Plus with much ice. Getting nice, laying back, speak on my life. Word up.
Black nations, dime smokers, vow carriers, mocha chokers, burned buildings, brothers building, save the children, investigative reports.
Calling all cars, ghetto psychos, often dangerous, leaving mass scars on those who were found, bound, gagged, and shot when they blast the spot. Victims took off like astronauts. Get with this, even your best can't. Come on down. You're the next contestant. Get your pockets dug from all your chemical bankings. Caught them at the red light on Putnam Avenue in Franklin. They used to heat up the cypher with a shot that was hyper than your average JFK sniper. He just came home to Sparford, rolling like Kaufman, and lay that ass out like carpet. Stop the stuttering, boys. Say complaints for the 5-0, then praise the God. Bow. They release shots and premeditate the grab. And then they jet back to the lab, and then remain in Shallon, and endangered Allen. Shorties lose blood by the gallons.
Crack patients, dime smokers, vow carriers, mocha chokers, burned buildings, brothers building, save the children, investigative reports.
Yo, I grabbed a pen for revenge and let Lucy, like Muslims standing on the block rocking the kufi. The $100 kick, rocking kids back for more, starring gun wars with black Reeboks and velours. Jungle way of life, living villain, packed with visions, copywritten, throwing bread to pigeons. Christ has risen, king elegant.
Slang master jacket, Spencer noodle hats in 69. Old timers, time the brother shot craps, the baggy blue guest things. Push things off from Palm Springs, I'm locked in the Bing. Rocky ring label, rap king, the corner emperor. The go to D's play the benches. Rednecks be hanging big niggas down in Memphis. Back in LY, hit the bullseye with loaded nines. Life is like Tarzan, swinging from a thin vine. Shattered dreams and mirrors don't lead to press spirals. Aim at the white shadows with big barrels. The Moedas, the ball-headers milking armorettas. Who fear none, crushing all personal vendettas. Yo, they use guns while we angrily shot arrows. You better keep your eye on the sparrow.
Bugging rosters, cooking cropsters, dime droppers, 25-to-lifers, backstabbers, blowers, illegal cocaine growers, starvation, profanity, anxiety, brothers try me, gunslingers, dead ringers, investigative reports. Investigative reports.
And integrated a number of corrupt cops, judges, and
investigative reports
positions to ensure the continued success of the drug smuggling and laundering operations.
Workers who are getting welfare on the side are mired in poverty. Some are double dippers. They are employed by the federal government and they illegally receive a government welfare check. Highly placed sources tell me that within a matter of weeks there will be indictments in Baltimore federal court stemming from Operation Match. Under this program, the Social Security numbers of federal workers are matched with the Social Security numbers of welfare recipients to find out who is working and collecting. I've learned that out of an initial batch of more than 2,000 federal workers in Maryland who are collecting welfare, a list of about 1,500 matchups is now in the hands of the Maryland U.S. Attorney. He'll sort through the cases and decide how much money has been stolen and which federal employees are doing the stealing. Further, I've been told by sources in Washington that the Justice Department will prosecute any federal worker who's making at least $10,000 a year and who has collected $2,000 or more in welfare money. All of the remaining cases will go to the state for local prosecution. But my sources tell me there is no doubt there will be federal indictments. Baltimore has the second highest percentage of people on welfare among all the major cities in the United States. More than 133,000 Baltimoreans depend on the monthly welfare check to make ends meet. The Welfare Quality Control Unit in Maryland suspects fraud in almost 11.5% of the welfare cases in Baltimore City. But some experts think it's even more than that. The man responsible for prosecuting welfare fraud cases in Baltimore charges that official estimates about cheating may be deceptive.
In 1975, the standards for certain error rates were liberalized and changed, and by doing so, a great many of the prior errors, by definition, were eliminated just by the change of the definition of what an error rate is. So through I guess you could call it a sleight of hand if you want to, we have come up with better-looking statistics. I shouldn't say we, they have.
To my knowledge, he's not correct. And the error rate has come down gradually over a period of 3 years. Significantly, it's been reduced over a 3-year period. And I don't think by any stretch of imagination that has been something just on paper alone.
The next logical question is, why is the welfare ripoff allowed to continue? George Hopkins spent 18 years tracking down welfare cheaters in Baltimore City before retiring recently from the Special Investigative Unit of the Department of Social Services. Hopkins charges that in some cases, the caseworker may be to blame.
Yes. I feel that a number of caseworkers feel very strongly that the clients aren't getting enough, and that anything that a client might do to get a little extra is pretty much all right. This is nationwide, too.
But when I presented Hopkins' charge to a group of 8 Baltimore City caseworkers, the reaction was unanimous.
And I put the blame on the worker.
And you're telling me that some workers, you or anybody else, I don't know who, don't sympathize with the clients and don't let them get away with it?
Well, I'm saying we do sympathize with the client, but that does not stop us from doing our job and penalizing the client. If they have an overpayment, we do the overpayment. You can sympathize with someone, but also do your job.
And you don't know that there's fraud going on and let it go on?
That's right. We do not overlook fraud, that's what you're saying.
In fact, the caseworkers made some serious charges of their own about welfare fraud. Several workers charged that abuses go on an everyday basis. They know they go on, and so they say does the administration of the Department of Social Services.
We have been told that if there's a thin line between the client's eligibility or non-eligibility for assistance, you deal with the gray area. You go on and give the client assistance. We have been told that.
I don't think that in any way accurately reflects what agency policy is or what agency practice is. I am more than willing, I am very accessible to any worker or supervisor who in any way feels that any pressure is being brought to bear on them to handle a case in any way other than what they consider to be the proper way.
But if you think that's bad, you haven't seen anything yet. In the course of my investigation into welfare fraud, I uncovered the fact that the state of Maryland will never collect hundreds of thousands of dollars that were ripped off by welfare cheaters in 1975 and 76 because of the state's own bureaucratic bungling. On July 1st, 1975, a state law went into effect requiring that all new welfare applicants be advised of the penalty for welfare fraud when they first apply for the money. Practically a year later, in the summer of 1976, it was discovered that the requirement had never been carried out in Baltimore City or anywhere else in Maryland. Worse yet, I discovered it still took the state more than 2 months to come up with an acceptable fraud statement, the Form 401A. But the damage was already done. Because the Maryland Human Resources Department had ignored the state's own regulation, almost 1,000 welfare fraud cases were dropped in Baltimore City alone just last year. And hundreds of thousands of dollars, perhaps more than $1 million, paid out to welfare cheaters can never be collected. That's taxpayers' money. It's our money.
Perhaps during that time, some cases were lost. I don't know the number, but I know not of a year's hiatus without that form being in place. It did not take us a year to put it in place. Well, it was done with great dispatch because it was very important. You know, and I don't recall that we took a year to do it and that all those cases went by the board.
Well, I have a memo here from the Department of Social Services which says that 933 cases were not prosecuted because of the fact that there was no Form 401A. Who's responsible for that? That's a lot of money we're talking about.
You find responsibility sometimes when you get a suit. You think you're in good shape until you get a suit, and maybe that's a very positive thing to have happen.
But the fact of the matter is that between the summer of 1975 and the summer of 1976, welfare cheaters in Maryland had a license to steal out of the taxpayer's pocket, and they did. And even after the mistake had been caught and state officials knew what was happening, it still took more than 2 more months to draw up this 2-page fraud statement. Add 2 more months to open season at the taxpayer's expense. The incredible Form 401A bungling is one reason there's been an alarming drop in the number of welfare fraud cases that have been prosecuted in Baltimore during the past 3 years. In 1975, 249 welfare fraud cases were prosecuted here. By 1977, the number of prosecutions had dropped to 80. In 75, the courts ordered welfare cheaters to make retribution, to pay back a total of almost $300,000. By last year, that had dropped to $100,000. In our investigation, we discovered that another reason for this situation is the length of time it takes welfare investigators in Maryland to complete a case. After I checked the records, I found out that as of December 1977, there were still more than 1,500 welfare fraud cases either currently being investigated or not yet even assigned to an investigator in Baltimore City. That's a 1,500 case logjam. The investigative unit, the SIU, was completing an average of about 50 cases a month. This means that it would take SIU the next 2.5 years just to complete the cases they already have backed up, even if not one single new case was added to the load until 1981. The head of the Major Frauds Division of the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office says that kind of work is not acceptable.
They're still working with the same number of investigators as they had several years ago. In fact, they may be working with less investigators. The cases are not coming in currently.
I don't consider that to be serious, considering that some time ago we had a Several years ago, we had a much larger backlog, and I think we are beginning to cut into that.
One of the things that would help us in that process, as well as more staff in state SIU and our own overpayments unit, is to have more staff available in the state's attorney's office. At the present time, we only have in effect, 1/10 of one state's attorney to help us with what amounts to a flow of hundreds of cases. And
making matters even worse is the fact that right now there's a 1-year statute of limitations on prosecuting welfare fraud cases in Maryland. That means that if the case is not brought to trial within 1 year after the fraud occurs, then it cannot be prosecuted, ever. One of my sources passed me some secret Department of Social Services memos on the fraud problem. The memos clearly state that more than 300 welfare fraud cases had to be dropped last year because the statute of limitations had run out. So in Baltimore City during 1977, 933 welfare fraud cases were not prosecuted because of the 401A form, and more than 300 more were dropped because of the statute of limitations. That's over 1,200 fraud cases that never made it to court. Only 80, that's right, 80 cases were successfully prosecuted. This year, the Maryland General Assembly did vote to extend the 1-year statute of limitations to 3 years. So as of this July 1st, there will at least be more time to try welfare fraud cases in Maryland. But the problems of investigating welfare cheating don't end there. The investigators themselves have their hands tied. One of those investigators is Thomas Alston. Recently, I went with Alston on a round of house calls. At 3 stops out of 4, nobody was home. At the 4th house, the recipient cooperated with Alston. But if he had not cooperated...
Tuck the tail and run. By that I mean leave out. We have no authority to make the persons cooperate.
So it's not as if you're, let's say, a police investigator with those kinds of legal powers to force somebody to talk to you.
Well, we have very limited powers, and as such, we more or less plead with persons to get cooperation.
The Special Welfare Fraud Investigative Unit needs more trained investigators. The National Welfare Fraud Association recommends that there should be 1 investigator for every 1,000 recipients. In Baltimore, there is 1 investigator for more than 16,000 clients. Now, I've thrown a lot of facts and figures at you, so let's summarize here. First of all, there's the grand jury report released today. It blasted the inept management, excessive red tape, and sloppy investigative work of the Baltimore City welfare system. Okay, second, there are lots of ways to rip off welfare, and I can assure you that all of them are going on right now. Matter of fact, some experts believe there is fraud in 20 to 40% of welfare cases in Baltimore. Also, the most common kinds of fraud involve food stamps, working people who are collecting welfare on the side, and social services employees who are stealing themselves. Along those lines, informed sources tell me that indictments will be returned within a matter of just a few weeks against federal workers in Maryland who are double dipping. Now, here's another thing. Many people blame the caseworkers for going soft on welfare cheaters. But the workers told me that the real trouble is with their bosses at the Department of Social Services, that they work under orders not to rock the boat by challenging welfare ripoffs, and that in many cases agency rules practically encourage cheating. Finally, we've seen that welfare fraud flourishes because of bureaucratic ineptitude, like in the case of the Form 401A, and because of the tremendous backlog of fraud investigations which are not completed, Jerry. Fewer and fewer cases are actually making it to court.
Well, we have seen a lot of ways to cheat welfare, but I think one of the more disturbing things that you touched on there, and what we talked about earlier, is the fact that some of the rules and regulations actually allow ripoffs, legal ripoffs.
That's right, Jerry. This is one of the things that the caseworkers talked about. They gave me an example of the child care or daycare expenses, where in some cases welfare recipients are claiming, and they're getting paid several $100s a month for daycare for a 16 or 15-year-old child. So,
okay, well, this is a severe problem. Thank you very much for a very extensive and very fine report.
Okay,
coming up, the Fonz ties the knot.
By day, it's Main Street for the East Side, gateway to the city's sprawling eastern industrial suburbs. Tradition runs deep here. Customs die slowly.
I'm tired of this dirty old city.
Joe never once gave it away.
But when night falls, the avenue changes fast into the Strip. Young girls peddle their wares at the avenue's glitzy downtown neighbor, the Block. Here, young boys hustle for the pleasures of passing motorists. Boy prostitution is nothing new here around Patterson Park. In fact, back in 1978, this national gay magazine ran a feature article on the boys of Baltimore and where they could be picked up. This year, the Eastern Avenue hustle made the papers again. 2 neighborhood teenage boys, allegedly picked up on the avenue, were arrested and charged with the robbery, stabbing, and brutal murder of a prominent art collector at this home in Mount Washington.
But after the murder, I think that that's what set everybody up in arms, and they just felt like it just couldn't go on. You just can't close your eyes and say, well, this problem's going to go away, because in 18 years it hasn't went away.
Sergeant Thomas Bull commands the 4-man Vice Squad unit out of the city's southeast district. Why does the community seem to be more up in arms now than in the last 3 or 4 years?
I think the recent publicity given to the trials in Atlanta, where it's fairly obvious that the man was involved in picking up young boys.
They're big shots that are coming here. Not all people, they're big shots.
Last month, Sergeant Bull faced the wrath of angry Highlandtown residents at a community meeting on the problem.
It would take me a few minutes to break it down and how many arrests we actually made. And we made...
Because statistics are not the actual thing.
Well,
statistics and numbers do not prove what is actually going on.
No, I think they do.
No, they don't.
A hustle here and a hustle there. New York City is the place where they said, hey babe, take a walk on the wild side.
The boys you see in these pictures are prostitutes. They're waiting to be picked up along Eastern Avenue. On a recent Friday night, the I-Team watched the action on the street using a special night lens. The same cars circled the block again and again before making contact. Since February 1st, undercover Vice Squad detectives have arrested 18 suspected prostitutes here. That's more than during the entire previous 4 months.
There's no doubt that teenagers can use the money.
In the gay community, some leaders tell me that while they don't particularly support the prostitution, they will lend legal support to both the men and boys involved in such relationships.
So the organization went on record as supporting men who are involved in relationships with younger people, and the boys that are involved in those relationships also.
Well, does that mean that that the Gay Alliance endorses a situation where a young boy, a teenage boy, prostitutes himself openly on the street?
No, I don't think that it's a situation where the organization is endorsing those relationships. What it is doing is supporting the legal rights of the people that are involved in those relationships, which is a different issue altogether.
If you tell the kids, this is what is expected, and if everybody knows what's expected, they know how much money they're going to make, and they know what I'm expecting for the money.
One man who was willing to admit on camera that he has occasionally picked up boys along Eastern Avenue is Jim Dupuis.
What do you get out of it personally?
Well, I have some very good memories as far as one young man in particular that I'll always remember that I met when I was just coming out as far as being gay goes. He was the first guy that I ever really fell in love with. And I spent about 3 years with him, almost.
How old was he?
He was 15 when I met him, and he was 18 when I left.
Some gay leaders insist that the teenage hustlers are in fact homosexual, that they are not naive and innocent, and that they are old enough to decide what kind of sex they want and with whom. But the recent arrests of 2 men charged with selling a 12-year-old Patterson Park boy to an undercover FBI agent in Washington certainly does not support that argument.
I think the question here is, do you really think that a 12 or 13-year-old teenager is mature enough to make a responsible decision to go out and prostitute himself?
You're asking me a very loaded question there. First of all, you're interjecting prostitution, and you're interjecting a very young age. Boys from the age of 9 or 10 up are having sex, whether it's by themselves, with kids in the neighborhood, or with people older than themselves out of the neighborhood. It goes on. Now, how you choose to moralize that or pass judgment on that, that's your judgment and the judgment of your viewers, but it goes on.
It certainly is going on along Eastern Avenue. That much we know for sure. Police, spurred on by an angry, frustrated community, are cracking down and cleaning up the strip. Now, East Baltimoreans want to know how long the cleanup will last and how much help the teenage prostitutes who are caught will get. With Instant Eye in Highlandtown, Dave Bryan, Channel 13 Eyewitness News. 2 weeks ago, an I-team investigation of teenage boy prostitution along Eastern Avenue hit the air. We reported that teenage boys, in some cases as young as 12 and 13 years old, were waiting on corners at night, offering to sell themselves for sex.
We want to make it abundantly clear that we are not going to rest, we are not going to stop until the problem is solved.
Tonight, more than 100 Highlandtown residents filled the church hall to standing room only. Older lifetime residents and younger people who make their homes here too. And the public officials turned out, from the city councilmen to the state legislators. The police told them they're doing the best they can. 25 new male prostitution arrests in just the past 2 months using undercover cops.
Not only picking up the young men that are standing on the corners, but also by having a police officer standing on a corner and have him solicited by a person from the gay community who comes into Highlandtown to pick up young boys.
While the talking goes on inside, what everybody's so upset about is going on outside, here on the streets and corners of Eastern Avenue. People here in East Baltimore feel like they've been putting up with it for a long time. Tonight, they're throwing down the gauntlet.
They've got to know that we mean business. That's the police department as well as our elected officials, and we're putting them on notice that it is not going to continue.